welcome to a special edition of Thursday Thoughts. Today we're going to continue finishing up the Q&A from last week's roundtable. We've had quite a bit of questions, and when we wrapped up the session on Thursday, which was a really good session because Mark is here to wait here because Mark here is such an expert on croissant and lamination. So Mark, are you ready for our questions?
Thank you. I'll give it my best shot with your help.
Okay. All right. So the first one is, can I make a perfect croissant, or is it a dream to make a perfect croissant in tropical weather?
Well, it is not a dream, but it is extremely challenging. I have had the good fortune, I would say, to have actually worked in with customers in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico and Jamaica. And Richard Charpentier and I were just sort of sharing. He lived in the Bahamas for a time as well. It is quite challenging. The most important thing is to keep everything cool. And so this starts with making the dough. And as the room temperatures can be quite hot, like when I was working in the bakery in Jamaica, it was 110 degrees in the bakery in Fahrenheit. So that's almost 40 Celsius. And that is pretty extreme. And so, you can use cold water and ice to a certain extent, but that's not the only thing. What you need to do is you need to refrigerate the flour a couple days beforehand. So if you have 50-pound bags of flour, you need to put those several bags of flour in the refrigerator several days ahead of time, because it will take many days to extract all the heat out of that. So you start off with cold flour, cold water, and get a cold dough, and just keep that dough cold as much as possible, right? And then you can do it, right? It's just about keeping everything cool. So you would roll the dough, you portion it out, ferment it, roll the dough, and book fold it, as we were talking about with Fritz last week Thursday. And so it means you envelop the butter and then back in the fridge for a few minutes, and then roll it out for your first fold and back in the fridge to rest for 20 minutes. And just always keep it refrigerated with all your rests. And when you're ready to do production, if you're a smaller facility, don't try to roll out the whole dough all at once. Do half or 1/3 at a time so you can keep everything cool. Of course, if you can get refrigerated granite or marble countertops, that would be wonderful, but that is probably more of a pipe dream in the Caribbean, because the electricity is also extremely expensive to keep something like that cool, right?
Absolutely. And if you could produce these products at night or early in the morning, the better it is, before it gets too hot in the bakery. And understand that a lot of bakeries in the tropical areas do not have air conditioning. So that, those are excellent tips to start with. Yes,
air conditioning is open the door and get a breeze off the ocean.
Yes, you can do it, but follow what Mark suggested in terms of the cooler ingredients. All right.
And there are, you can find ice charts. I think we might have one on Bakerpedia as well, where it tells you to your target dough temperature. If you're trying to reach a dough temperature of 68 degrees and your flour is 80 degrees and your room is 100 degrees, it tells you how much ice you have to put in together with the water to achieve that optimum dough temperature. The one saving grace with something like croissant, because the lamination process can act as a form of gluten development to some extent, you don't have to worry about mixing problems with all the ice as you would with bread, because the water, the frozen water, of course, that is ice, doesn't get absorbed until it starts melting.
Right. Well, are you ready for a gluten-free question?
Yeah, let's try it.
Is it possible to laminate the butter and get the layers in a gluten-free croissant?
It is possible. It is very challenging, but it is possible. I have seen a baker on LinkedIn in Australia who has claimed to have done this. And the key is in developing an extensible gluten-free dough. So using different proteins such as certain isolated or treated whey proteins, um, and those types, and things like xanthan gums and so on, so that you have a dough that will stretch and extend and be able to hold on to those and extend with the butter. Because if the dough is too soft, then the dough spreads and the butter doesn't. If the dough is too stiff, the butter spreads and the dough doesn't. So you won't get the lamination. It's getting that right texture. It's just like with a regular dough, only though that it's a little trickier to get that texture, right? And yes, it is possible. And if you're unfamiliar with gluten-free in bread baking or things like that, then work with some of the suppliers. They have a lot of great solutions.
And the nice thing I like about gluten-free is you don't need to give it a long ferment.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, because you don't need
You
to
don't need the
activate
relaxation.
yeah, you don't need to develop the enzymes and that. You don't need the
Right.
relaxation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next question would be, what kind of enzymes might be beneficial to reduce the variation between production batches? Because sourcing of the same quality of ingredients might be a challenge to keep along.
Okay. Well, I would say, first of all, the first thing would be kind of enzymes that you can easily add to a dough like this would be something like amylase, which is going to help with fermentation. Because fermentation is your friend in this to keep it consistent. So if your inconsistency is falling number, in that if you're getting a flour that has low enzyme activity, and then you can boost it with amylase, or you use malted barley flour.
Mhm.
Um, and in terms of it keeping it consistent, so it's understanding what are you adjusting, like what are the inconsistencies of your income ingredients, to adjust, so that if you cannot get the flour consistent from your miller, then you got to kind of work with your miller then on the C of A's and stuff so that you know what to adjust. Otherwise, you're playing a guessing game. It is challenging, like, thinking back to our Caribbean question, when you are an island nation. I am again familiar from my work with being in the Caribbean, and especially in places like Jamaica and Puerto Rico. They are basically stuck with whatever's on the boat. So their ability to blend grists from large storage facilities is not as good as what you would have on the mainland, right? So where on the mainland, a flour miller will be in connection with a big terminal, and they can bring in a lot of different wheat to blend their grist. But whatever's on the boat is all they've got to blend with. And so they
Hmm.
can't all of a sudden order in another rail car of this or a rail car of that. They take that whole boatload in, and they may be stuck with the same type of flour or similar as far as their blending ability for maybe a month or two, right? Depending on how often the miller is able to get a boat in. Um,
Hey, Mark, here lies an opportunity, right? What's stopping us from
mhm.
opening a mill in the Caribbean, right?
Oh, there are mills in there.
I know.
We gotta build small boats to get more grain there that cost effectively.
Okay. Um, how do we optimally control and match the temperature of the dough to the butter? That's a great question.
So the temperature, first of all, would be using the standard methods that a baker uses, where you take you have a desired dough temperature, what we
So
call
so
the DV.
let's iterate again. How important this is. Your butter
The,
temperature must be between 15 to 20, right?
correct. Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
So our suggested dough temperature is
15 to 20.
somewhere between there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
so
how would you
15 to 20.
suggest to make them as close as possible?
Oh, to make those as close as possible,
Mm-hmm.
well,
Mm-hmm.
you want to first of all keep the dough cool in the whole mixing process. So, as we talked about with for our Caribbean friends, if the ambient temperature is much too hot where you're storing your flour, or if your flour comes in from an outdoor silo, you have to find a way to refrigerate it. You have to chill it in advance. So you need to start with a cool dough, and getting a cool dough, you calculate basically the dough temperature, the air temperature, the friction temperature, and you take the desired the target temperature multiplied by three minus those things, and that gives you your water temperature. And the key to that is also then texture. So making sure that you hydrate the dough sufficiently that it is not too stiff, and don't overhydrate, don't put too much water on it so it's not too soft. So usually this is something, once you have a standard flour and a method, it's one amount of water that you always use. If your flour varies, then you'll have to find methods to check that during the mixing process. So once everything is, before the dough is fully developed, once it's sort of all wet, that you can check it either by hand, or if you have another methodology to make sure it will not be too soft or too stiff. Because once the dough is completely mixed, you can't adjust it anymore.
Right. So I would always suggest that you try to go to a lower temperature. So try to
Hmm.
target a lower temperature because you can always bring it up. It's easier to bring it up
Yep.
than
Hmm. Exactly.
put
Yep.
the whole mixed dough into the reefer, right? So
Hmm.
try to target as low as you can. If you come out cooler than expected, it's easy to change that. Just wait a few more minutes before it hits the temperature of the butter.
Yep.
So I
Hmm.
would always like figure those two things out. What's the temperature of the butter? And always keep it's preferable if you keep the temperature of the butter, or you store the butter in a temperature controlled place if
Yes.
possible at all. Okay.
Yep.
And then just take it out as you need to use it. Don't let it sit in the mixing room at all.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So
It's
that's
usually tempered, and like as David from Fritsch talked about, and with their fat pump that they use on their lines,
I love
is
that
that,
fat pump.
yeah. So if you're taking butter out of a 5 degree cooler, they know that the friction from the fat pump delivers them a 15-degree butter on the line, right? So
Right. So
because they have
target
that
that.
increase, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Next question. How can we succeed in producing high quality croissant with a very high fluctuation rate of protein and gluten in the flour? I think we covered a little bit of that just now when we talk about the variation in.
Yes, yeah. If you have high protein flour, try to add a soft wheat, like a lower protein flour, to try and even it out. And there again, you need to work with your supplier, getting the information ahead of time, not so that you don't have the flour and the water in the mixer, and then the phone call is like, okay, what should I do now? It's not going to help.
Oh, high quality croissant starts with, lamination. So
Hmm.
I think you can always use a softer flour, to deal
Yep.
with the variations. Okay, so how can we make our croissants puff up? We are producing in a continuous line with fractionated plastified butter at 82% solids. That's a pretty good butter, don't you think?
That's pretty good. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
most commercial butter is about 83 to 85%
Mm-hmm.
fat. Some of them in Europe might be 1 or 2% higher.
So we don't
Um,
think it's the butter's problem here? What do you think is the
No,
problem if they
I
don't
think
get
it's
enough
the
milk?
number of layers. The amount of fat in ratio to the dough and the number of layers. A traditional handmade artisan style croissant is 27 layers. Some of the commercial croissants go all the way down to 18 layers. Um, just because to save time on the production line on processing and stuff. So they're not quite as flaky. But to get some of the really flaky ones that we start to see out and about, they add in another fold here and there. They might add in a double fold in between. And so they end up with around 50 to 72 layers in that range, right? So the more layers you have, you'll get more of a puff. So if you think of a classic puff pastry, that has 144 layers. Of course, you need to use far more fat. You would have to use about 40 to 50% of the dough weight in fat to achieve that 144 layers. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is doable, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. Okay. How would you check the plasticity of your fat for elimination?
That is
If
a
if before today, I would just have used a rolling pin and just hit at it.
yes. You
But
just bash
today
it
we
with a
have
rolling pin.
science.
Um,
Mark, what do you
yeah.
suggest?
I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of great videos on YouTube where you can see people bashing the butter with the rolling pin. If you're doing it at home, the great thing to use is like a Ziploc bag where you can keep it into a nice shape. But no, some of it is still experience at this point, unless you get into texture analyzers, because it
Get a
is
texture
not a
analyzer. Yep.
yeah, it is not something that you will get on the information from the fat producer. Um, it is, of course, dictated by the ingredients in terms of the amount of saturated or fully hydrogenated fats that are used, and the way that it is processed, how it is votated, how it is crystallized. Um, but there is a method on a texture analyzer called a work softening method. And it's basically a cylinder where the fat goes into the cylinder with a plunger on it, and it moves up and down a set number of times and with a certain amount of pressure and things. And the instrument measures how much this plasticity changes over
Yeah, the
time as it
modulus
is.
in there would tell
So
you. Right.
exactly.
Right.
Yes, there's other instruments like a rheometer where you can
Mm-hmm.
check the modulus, the storage, and the energy storage and the energy release modulus.
Hmm.
That gets even more sophisticated. I actually have
Actually, I've seen a viscometer that tests peanut butter.
yep,
So I think that would
exactly.
work as well.
Yep, very similar cone and plate
Yeah.
type of process where it rotates and it measures the resistance and it measures how much of the energy gets stored and how much is released. Because quite interestingly enough, the plastic shortenings and butters actually store some of the energy. It's quite
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
was
you
not
should
known
be
before.
able to get a consistent reading with the different batches of butter that you get in. That could be one
Hmm.
of your control points as well if you use a texture
Yes,
analyzer.
yep. Hmm.
Good question. Good question. Okay. Next question. We cannot consistently get flour with those proteins in Kenya. Uh, can we use any other additives to reduce the overall protein?
Well,
Don't.
there's no additives. It's try to blend the weak flour with the strong flour to get as consistent a result as you can. Um, and I spoke with a member in Algeria we were talking about who is only gets the one kind of high protein hard flour, but they do have access to soft flour, to pastry flour, and if you can do that to blend it in to weaken it, that's the main thing.
And don't forget, sometimes higher protein doesn't mean good quality protein. Higher protein
No.
could mean that you're getting a flour that has a lot of ash,
Yep.
right? So watch that ash as well. I mean, if you get like a 12, 13% protein and your ash is like really high, a lot of that protein is coming from the ash. So my suggestion is to understand that. And if that's the case, use it at 100%.
Well, and
And
if
that's not much you can do with taking out ash.
yeah, if there's information on there with the Farino numbers or things like that, that can help tell you the story as to the quality of the protein. The important thing that we need for viennoiserie, which is croissants and Danish and things like that, is the extensibility. So that it's not just protein alone, but protein is what we use as a initial guide.
Correct. I think really be concerned only if the extra amount of protein affects the buckiness of your dough. And
Mm-hmm.
then if it does that, then follow what Mark just recommended, as in dilute it with softer
Mm-hmm.
flour. Yeah. All right. And that's cost savings, right? Who doesn't want
Mm-hmm.
cost savings? What is the difference in the process when producing frozen dough? I think it's a really easy one.
The main thing is keep everything even cooler and short fermentation or no fermentation at all.
Yep.
Usually for frozen dough, it's really cool dough, no pre-ferment, no bulk fermentation, right away into lamination and processing as quickly as the dough will tolerate.
Okay, so this question says, if I don't have a convection oven and I am using a deck oven, what would be the time and suggested baking temperatures?
Well, in Fahrenheit, as an example, if you're using a deck oven, you would most likely bake at 400 Fahrenheit,
Oh, higher temperatures.
a higher temperature, because with convection, the additional friction from the fan and the way it carries moisture away quicker, you generally bake at about 25 degrees lower. And croissants are usually at 375 in a convection oven.
Okay.
They will also take slightly longer. So if you usually bake 12 minutes in convection, they will probably be anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes in the deck oven. That also, again, depends on how well the deck moves the steam away. So you want to, in the beginning, you want to keep the vents closed to keep the steam in so that the croissant can puff nicely. And then you open the vent to let it out. And as quick as that steam vents is what helps it finish drying out. But usually about 3 to 5 minutes longer than in a convection oven. Of course, it always depends on size and how many pans you load at the same time and things like that.
Okay. What anti-staling agents can be used in croissants?
All of them.
I agree. Next question.
I'm
Can we
sorry.
use sourdough in the recipe of croissants? Can we use sourdough in
Um,
croissants?
yes, you can. Yeah.
It might not taste
Uh,
very good, right?
they not everybody likes them. The combination of the sourdough in a pastry, it's sort of an unexpected experience for some people. It works with some savory things. Um, it can be done. It's just I have found that it's people don't always like it. Is kind of the easy way to put it, right?
Mm-hmm. In some countries, mother dough or masa madre is used in the mixing of frozen dough. What is the mother dough? What is that mother dough where we use the yeast? Um, okay, let's just edit this part out. Let's go to the next question. Can the dough be rested overnight in between laminations?
Yes, it can. The important thing is again during the initial lamination there to keep everything nice and cool because remember in the refrigerator the fermentation doesn't stop; it just goes very slow. And when you take it out to continue laminating the next day, what you will have to do is carefully use a like something very sharp, like a small knife or pin, to get some of that gas out so that Otherwise, you will crush the layers, right? Because you'll see the dough will rise up from proofing. And so you'll have gas build up everywhere in between. So you don't want to completely break the layers, but you want to pierce it to carefully get that gas out before you start rolling. Because if you just take it the way it is and hammer down on it and let the dough fart, so to speak, it might seem funny and everything, but then it's not going to look very funny when you don't have nice looking croissants afterwards.
That's true. So the last question is concerning a flying crust or the top layer of the croissant detaching from the croissant. What could be the cause of that?
There's a number of possibilities. Dough oxidation, like too much oxidation, could be one of them. If there's too much ascorbic acid in it, or if you've over fermented your pre-ferment or something like that. And the other thing is improper lamination. If it's not laminated properly, and that you just basically have a big hole puffed there, right? When you're laminating manually, you have to make sure you're careful about eliminating bubbles, because when you do it by hand, it's very easy to get bubbles in, even though you don't intend to, and you have to watch for that because those air bubbles, they push the fat aside and they create these blisters like a flying crust.
Right. One more thing I like to add is try to take your ascorbic acid down or any kind of oxidation system you have in there, because the more oxidizing agents you use, the more bursts you get in the oven and the weaker the top layer is. Okay, so you could look into that as well. Well, we have come to the end of our Q&A, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure a lot of people are so thankful for your expertise in this area.
My pleasure. And that was a lot of questions. That's great. There's a great engaged audience.
Yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.